Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Dan Gottlieb. I am an analyst at Gartner for sales leaders. Many folks know Gartner as organization that writes about technology. We are part of a group that literally focuses on writing research for sales leaders. I'll sort of be moderating the conversation today, and my job is to do research on sales tech and make sense of it for our clients. So I'll pass it on over to Steve and then Thiago, and then we'll jump right in.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, everybody. I'm Stephen Bryerton. I'm the SVP of sales here at ZoomInfo, and I'm responsible for new business sales. So new customer acquisition, growing our customer base, all of that falls under my purview. Just by way of introduction, I've been with Discover.org and ZoomInfo for the last 11 years. And, kind of similar to Dan, not only do we sell sales tech, but we are a very large practitioner of building a go-to-market machine. And then we also get a view into, 20,000 plus companies and how they go to market and what are they doing, what are they investing in, what's working, what's not. So that's probably one of my favorite things about this role.
Yeah, and I'm Thiago, CRO at Chorus. So under my purview, I oversee the customer-facing team focused on Chorus. What's more important is I was also a customer of Chorus and also ZoomInfo prior to joining the organizations. And similar to Steve, love the fact that I'm able to work with thousands of practitioners out there, learn from them, and then also provide some feedback on how we're running our ecosystem.
That's great. And I'm excited to have both of you here because I think what we're going to do a little bit today is geek out. We're going to talk about conversation data. We're going to talk a little bit about what kind of data, let's just talk about data points themselves that are available, why it's interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of what Steve and Thiago do in their teams with conversation data. And then we're going to answer some of your questions along the way. This should be fun. This should be lighthearted, and we're going to have a good time. So we will be monitoring the chat and as well as the Q&A, but especially the chat. So if you got questions, fire away. We'll try to respond as quickly as we can, assuming they're relevant, please. So with that said, I think the first thing I want to do is let's just have some fun. I want to know from each of you a couple things. First thing, I want to know, what are your top 3 conversation intelligence data points? Just 3 data points. Why they're your favorite data points, but just focus on the data point itself and why it's been interesting to you and maybe tell a story. And I want to know one thing about you that I would never know from looking at your LinkedIn. So why don't we start with Steve?
Yeah, from a conversation intelligence piece and some of my favorite data points, the things that I'm consistently looking at. Number one, I'm looking for alternative mentions, right? So, what are prospective customers talking about, or what have they evaluated? What's top of mind for them? Obviously, ZoomInfo's offering has changed drastically, over the last couple of years with both M&A as well as new products deployed, and so that's expanded our scope a little bit. So the alternative landscape is a big one for me. The other things that I'm thinking about and using constantly, with that sort of growth from our business are the mentions across the team around certain talk tracks. So that might be a pricing conversation or talk track that we're trying. It might be a specific set of discovery questions. It might also be, talking about things like Chorus or some of our other product lines. And then lastly, I like to look for, hopefully like we have today, a lot of interaction back and forth during those conversations, rather than sort of the long monologues across our sellers. Talk to listen ratio, I'm at times focused on, but I'd much rather see sort of a good tennis match and a nice volley back and forth. And then the question, what wouldn't you know about me? I think it might be on LinkedIn or on golf, but I've caddied for several celebrities. Michael Jordan was one of my most popular loops. Him and Lawrence Taylor. I could tell you some good stories about those guys going out. some of the other athletes that I worked with. So yeah, that's an interesting point. That's always a good topic of conversation.
So we've got alternative mentions and competitors. I could ask you 1,000 questions about caddying. I caddied myself as well, actually.
It's a great thing from a seller, just mirroring, adapting. You're stuck with people for 4 hours. So,
oh, totally. It is. It absolutely is. And I could, it's also about delivery and reading the room and knowing the right way to present how to read a putt.
Yep.
So just to run back down Steve's top 3 data points, we have alternative mentions and competitors, right? So who else is being talked about in my deals? And Steve, you manage a pretty large sales force, so I imagine getting to look at the data points. This number of times this competitor was mentioned in this territory, et cetera. A great additional data point. Percentage of mentions using a talk track. So how many of my sellers are using the talk track that we suggested? And then lastly, just looking back, more seller behavior, are you having a tennis match conversation? Cool. 3 data points. We'll definitely come back to those later. Thiago, over to you.
Yes. Agree with all of Steve's points. So, but I'll give an alternative look from my lens. I have a strong 1, I would say. I'm going to give you a top 3, but I have one that is by far my favorite. Has been most impactful for me and my broader team. Is utilizing the AI that we have within Chorus to alert us of risk moments. So you can imagine along a sales cycle, it might be a quick sentence that the buyer may have said about the timing of getting something done by the end of the month, for example. So even saying something like, it's going to be I got a lot on my plate that might put this at risk, or I got a lot on my plate that the timeline doesn't work for me. And it's contextual, which is a much more advanced way of utilizing AI, but I absolutely love that. So you can imagine in my inbox, every single day, I get alerted of various deals that are at risk. And I can go and find those exact moments where, from the customer perspective, they dictate risk for us. So that is by far my number 1. Can't emphasize that enough. The second is if I'm diving deeper, right? That's more from a pipeline perspective, right, on the risk, and then I can dive into a deal. But once I'm inside of and utilizing it to view on a deal by deal basis, I love to take a look at competitor mentions, because what you typically see is there's a lot of competitor mentions by the prospect early on in the sales cycle. And then it starts to dwindle down as you start to get more ingrained. You start asking the right questions. You're looking, hey, we are that partner vendor of choice. It starts to dwindle down. And then sometimes there's an uptick when you're at the negotiation phase, right? Where people are looking to get the best deal. But analyzing that can bring forth a lot of insight into what's happening across the deal, and then to dive in exactly what are people saying when those competitors are being mentioned. And then the last one that I would mention, it's tied to the talk time. Absolutely, that's important. But we give people the ability to go a level deeper. And it's not just about the talk time, because a certain rep, when they talk all the time, could lead to higher close rates than another rep. So it's not only looking at that talk time, but what are the outcomes? Is it leading to moving deals forward up stages? And is it leading to more closed business? And is there a correlation for this individual? So I geek out on that too, because I think that's one of the questions we'd love to just give. Hey, here's the one size fits all. And it doesn't seem to really exist. That's another one of my favorite. And then on the what you wouldn't know about me from LinkedIn, Steven's sitting here talking about how he was hanging out with celebrities, right? And helping them in their golf game. Mine isn't really that exciting. But I love Brazilian and Spanish soap operas. So I geek out on those. I watch an episode a night. And it's a great way for me to keep up with my languages. So I was a native of Brazil, speak Portuguese, and I learned Spanish. And anyway, it just keeps it top of mind for me.
I have so much to react to right now. Imagine if we combine both your interests, so caddying for Spanish and Brazilian soap opera stars. So just to take it for a step back, Thiago's top number one is risk moments, right? And you're looking at like literally number of risk moments per deal in a deal and using that to drill down within a deal, similar to Steve, alternative mentions and competitors. And then lastly, I think it's really important for us to sort of just spend a minute with your last point, which is you look at talk to listen ratio, but one of the common value propositions in this market is you can optimize your, like your best reps. But what you're saying is something pretty nuanced and important. Just understand everyone's got their own style. And that there is, of course, healthy to have a best practice, healthy to have a benchmark to look at and compare against. But sometimes it's okay to understand that Thiago's style requires X and Dan's style requires Y. But at least we know that it's tied to better outcomes. It's good to go a step further in analysis rather than just flippantly say there's a perfect ratio for every seller. I love that. I think what's really interesting about what both of you were talking about. So let me just sort of contextualize both of you for a second. So Steve, how many sellers and managers sort of report underneath of you? And I'll ask a follow-up question in a second.
Yeah, I have a little shy of 200 account executives underneath me, and then there's another, roughly 30 that are in the management layer, from VP down to team lead.
And so, how frequently are you using conversation data to say look at more macro trends at a region level versus drilling into the specific deal? And then Thiago, I'm going to ask you the same question in a second.
Yeah, often, like daily. It depends on the point, right? So, the alternative mentions, I have a team that pulls that data out for us on a bi-weekly basis. I think he sends it out. And so I'm looking more for trends there, right? Are people jumping up, jumping down? Sort of gives us a whole readout on, any of their sort of alternative statistics as well. So like employee growth, funding, investment, to try to, again, put together a narrative and a story on why we might be seeing somebody more or less. And then, we're looking at things like talk tracks, more on like a daily, weekly cadence. Every Monday morning we have what we call our Learn to Sell meeting, which is all the account executives get together. We go through and go through topics around selling practices, something we want to focus on. And then the rest of that week, we have little 15-minute huddles. And in those huddles, and then in respective coaching calls, which also take place during the week, we'll pull out little snippets. So like, hey, here's Thiago giving this a try. It landed really well. This part, maybe fell a little flat, or, so on and so forth. So certain things we're looking at daily, other things we're looking at sort of, on a rolling bi-weekly or monthly cadence.
And so one of the really important takeaways for me on that is the role that the data points are playing in helping you spot trends and figure out which calls to listen to out of having $200+ it's a lot of deals to sift through. And I think that's kind of critical. But the second takeaway is in this sort of, when we talk about it at the industry level, we talk about reinforcement. And that tends to be the cheesy term that we use, right? Even though it's true, it's what we're doing.
Yep.
But what you're translating that towards is more like evidence-based reinforcement, rather than just sort of generic exercises that are not connected to what we do every day. Instead, literally listening to how customer calls are happening based on the talk tracks that are kind of working with outcomes. And I think that's it's funny because any sales leader that's trying to get the sales team to sort of follow recommended messaging, we all know how difficult that is. And evidence, it tends to be the best way to do it. So I just wanted to sort of react to that for a sec.
Yeah, I mean, to Thiago's point, then it's also like, it's then breaking it down at the rep level. So like, it's not okay to not try. It's okay to like try it. Maybe it didn't land well. And so like Thiago delivered it a few times. Then all of a sudden he tweaked it a little bit. And now we're seeing like, oh, performance is increasing. So he sort of found his way there. So.
Well, and you know, now at Gartner, we work with some of the world's biggest companies, not necessarily only sort of fast growing B2B tech companies. So we're now working with, you know, large manufacturing types of sales forces, right? Or groups that sell transportation, logistics type of services, large professional services groups, you know, really kind of complex, different kinds of selling. And I think one of the challenges there with regards to conversation intelligence is this sort of like resistance to, you know, the visibility that it creates. But I think what you're doing here is you're saying, well, it's allowing us to move into let's just talk about, you know, here are the calls that are directly correlated to better win rates. And that's actually a really compelling way to get someone to listen to trying a new message instead of just here, you know, the company says so, right? We think it's what's best.
Yeah, it directly affects the seller's wallet. Like, we're doing this and it's an outcome, like, you know, solely for your benefit. Now, obviously us as leaders, right? If everybody's doing better and improving, it's better for the business as well. But it does have like a very tangible impact for the sellers themselves.
That's cool. Okay. Thiago, so same question. Talk a little bit, you know, how many managers and sellers are sort of under you, and then let's examine your top 3 data points within that as well.
Yeah, I might even diverge a little bit based on what just happened here, if that's cool, from even some of my
Please.
top.
We're hanging out. We're hanging out.
And I'll go a little bit back in time. So to my previous role when I was running the go-to-market team at my previous employer. And that was a large, complex team. There's about 450 people.
Okay.
Everywhere from pre-sales all the way to technical support. Had everyone utilizing Chorus, the entire team. And that allowed us to get access to literally every single customer touch point that existed in the organization. And similar to some of the points that Stephen made, how I like to think about it is, prior to this, how we would go and make decisions, right? All of us on this call right now is we probably review our CRM data, right? Likely. And to be blunt, we quite frankly would do a lot of subjective discussions, right? On the few deals that myself or Stephen would have been directly involved with, compared to the thousands and thousands of conversations that our teams were having. And to me, I always look, hey, even with new tech that's coming, new data points, I don't want just to bring them in for the sake of, I need more data points on the conversations, but it's more like, what outcomes can we drive? So some of the things that we did were, for example, we were switching packaging. We were going from a transactional business where we were just slinging deals and 1-2 call closes to a more considered purchase where we were selling packages, right? And it was about 10x what our sellers would typically sell. But we needed to make that move in order to continue the growth that we were seeing. So through the use of conversation intelligence, we could find out, like, are people actually doing that new pitch? Are they pushing the more org-wide packaging perspective? The second tied to that was, since you're selling bigger deals, the negotiation aspect changes, right? It's more uncomfortable. The deals take about 3 times longer to sell, but they're 10x bigger. So, you know, we'll take that any day. Mm-hmm. And well, some of the things that we would analyze are, for example, how are we bringing in pricing and discounting even on that? Some of the shocking results after spending a lot of money from a training perspective on negotiations, we were still discounting first 20% of the time with no ask from the customer, just upfront giving things away, which is, you know, infuriating to see and learn. We never would have gotten access to that information before. And then the last component is just creating that culture of you want your reps and your team to see this not as, hey, what I just talked through, which is, hey, we found you're doing some things wrong, but it's, hey, we're just here to enable you to be the best version of yourself. That's our goal as a team. And really pitching that and highlighting top moments in front of everyone, right? In weekly team meetings, for example. And then what you start to see, and your own, like when you're on calls, go and tag people in there, right? As leaders and saying, hey, what did you think about my pitch here? How did I support you on there? And what you're going to find is all of a sudden, it's almost like you're crowdsourcing all this information and people are starting to ask coaching from one another. They start to collaborate on good ideas. They start taking proactively their snippets and putting them into playlists of like, here's how I compete against X competitor. And it just creates this network internally of constant improvement that was incredible to see in my previous organization.
So similar theme here, which is like, we can get ahead of what we're hearing faster. There's a little bit of sort of trend insight, which is sort of what Steve was talking about around competitors, but where you're talking about, Thiago, is something far more intentional, which is we have this huge initiative, literally a go-to-market changing initiative around packaging, pricing, solution. I think anybody in B2B tech that's had to sort of evolve their portfolio can understand going through some sort of challenge like this, some sort of change transformation. And you can play offense on understanding the adjustments, adjusting faster, and using that information to, either whether it's on a one-to-one basis or whether it's at a team-wide basis, like make adjustments, figure out what's going on, like in your discounting scenario, and nip it or adjust it, as well as understand is the stuff we're spending money on translating to the front line, without waiting for 18 months of lagging indicator outcome data to make an assessment of that. So that's a really interesting story, and it makes a ton of sense. So we have a question coming in here, and I think I just want to get both your takes on it real quick. So essentially, one of our folks is interested to know if top performers' styles are more or less malleable than average. Now that we have the kind of visibility that we do they tend to be the same style no matter the audience, or do you find that you're watching sort of they're willing to evolve, and that is part of what makes them a top performer? So why don't we start with Thiago, and then we'll ask Steve second.
Yeah, so I think it largely depends on the individual. So I'll start there, and then what some of their perspectives are in terms of, are they a lone wolf? Are they a challenger? Are they a relationship builder? Like, I can go on and on. It does depend overall on the individual. Why I care so much about looking at that second level data that we provide that's tied to outcomes is to better understand, like, hey, from our data, it does show that if our talk time is around 56% or 51%, whatever that may mean for you and your team, it doesn't mean that is the way that everyone should do it based on their styles. So there are some top performers that I mentioned within our top 5 that they do spend more time talking during calls, for example, than others. But what I think makes it easier to get people to change is that you can highlight in moment best practices for people, and they can see the customer's reaction to that and the outcome that's driven from moving sales cycles faster to things closing, that it makes it easier for someone, even if they are a top performer, they think they have it all figured out. They're like, wow, like that person is really picking things up, and I can actually see this 2-minute snippet of them doing something that's getting pushed from the top, and it worked really well. And it changes the conversation. Instead, before it was just, hey, I think you should try this. I saw so-and-so do it. But now that they can see it happening live and that customer reaction, it makes them really think like, wow, yeah, like I can adjust some and get better as well. But it takes time with many top performers that have been doing well, doing things a certain way.
Yeah, from what I see, I think there are certainly aspects, you talk about, I think Dan teed it up with like a level of adaptability. So when I look at our top performers, they do have more of there is more ability to adapt, right? It's sort of like, and I'm going to forget who said the quote, but it's, they sort of master the basics, and so that they can paint like an artist, right? They're much more on the artist level. And so what they will do is, what I've seen is they'll adapt to the prospect on the other end. So they can go like more analytical and talk more OI and numbers. They can like sit back and just, have a conversation if it's, you and your best friend out on the porch, right? Or, at the bar or wherever. They have that level of adaptability. So they'll sort of mirror the prospect. But what I've noticed is what they don't acquiesce on is when it comes to like sort of stating value, presenting price, being suggestive and what the prospect should buy based on sort of the needs, the discovery they did. They don't necessarily let the prospect off the hook, with like a cop-out objection, right? Like, oh, well, timing, I've got to do this, or wow, it's like more than I expected to pay for. They don't buckle on those things. That's where they tend to stand their ground. And because earlier on they did really good discovery, they adapted to their prospect, they can hearken back to those things and say like, Dan, be real with me here. Like, sort of that versus, Dan, you told me you were trying to get X numbers and these numbers show that this, like, they can go either way, but they're not willing to bend at the end. So I think that's what I've noticed across my top performers.
That's a great point, Stephen. And from a top performer perspective, I think when we analyze the data is they spend way more time on discovery than lower performer reps. So they still give what the customer wants. Like, I just want to show up and give a demo, but they do it in a way that allows them to understand pain points clearly and then be able to align back to that across the entire sales cycle in a really unique way. So that's another thing we found from data as well.
Is this really interesting trend that both of you are sort of like trend theme across what you're talking about, right? And it is coaching sellers is hard. It's difficult. Every seller, just like every person, is relatively different and therefore learns differently. And so when it comes to adoption, every seller, all of us can relate to conversations we've had in our career where a sales leader is like, you got to try doing this more often, doing that more often, or be more like that person, and you kind of like, okay, but how, give me something a little extra. And what you're both sort of referencing here is that using examples and evidence can help you take sort of a step further, a lot easier, in saying, okay, here's the one specific thing I want you to try, because the data is indicating that presenting pricing later in a deal or presenting sort of their interests in this way does lead to like a 10% increase. That's why I'm asking you to change it, not just to be more like Thiago, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just, I keep coming back to that. I have this really important extra tool set called evidence that I can use, not just as my argument, but also to help you see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think like when I think about it, and we had this conversation with our former enablement leader, where like any sales organization, you roll out, a framework, or you roll out a pitch deck, and then you're going to demo this way, and then you want to do that, right? You have like all of those little sort of moments that you think are critical to your sales cycle. And so for us, like our framework that we coined, it's called DEAL. It's a great little acronym, but it's discover, educate, align, and lock. So like lock is next steps moving forward, align the pain and the solutions to the customer pain, educate them on the market, what they should be running into, maybe what they don't know yet. And obviously discovery. That doesn't have to be a linear process, right? When you look at like average performers or even underperformers, they get so locked in, like, I'm going to do a barrage of questions here, and then I'm going to try to educate, and then I'm going to try to align, and then I'm going to go to next steps. And you look at like the higher end performers, which is where I think Thiago was going with, there is that level of individuality to help coach them. They're still checking all of those boxes that, they're hitting the discover, the educate, the align and lock, but it might start out in this particular conversation, which I think goes back to the question. Maybe I'm educating first, and then I'm doing a little bit of discovery, and then I go back to like more education, and now we start to align the product. And while I'm doing that, I'm doing more discovery on, hey, how are you going to use this? Hey, tell me like what you think the impact of it, right? I'm doing like even deeper discovery, and then we're going to get like, once I get my answer, then I'm going to lock on the next steps. So it's not about sort of maybe following the same exact process, but hey, there's these critical things that I need you to hit. I don't necessarily care how you hit them, but to your point, Dan, these are the proven things that when you hit them, increase your win rate, increase your ASP, increase all of those things.
That's great. We are knee deep in the weeds and mud now, and I love it. But I'm going to ask you to take we're going to take our mud boots off and step back out, and we're going to sort of transition the conversation for a second, because now I want to. We've been talking about these very specific. Great, the questions are starting to roll in. It's awesome. We'll address that in just a second, but let's sort of stop and step back and say, okay, as executives, there are some big problems that you have to work through all the time that CI sort of offers a different way of thinking about. And I think we could unpack what those are from the features you mentioned earlier. But I'll just share some data from Gartner, just to, but then I'm curious to hear, what are some of the sort of more strategic things that each of you have to work on, and how CI helps you in that. So a couple things that we've been witnessing. So from 2021, remember our customer base at Gartner, is sort of a very wide range of sales forces. And so what we've learned is that in 2021, updating seller competencies and skills to reflect a more of a virtual selling environment is really big, has been a huge investment area. The second one is in buying new tech to enable sellers across a wide range of different technologies. And then the third one is new messaging, iterating on product and iterating on messaging in order to support that. And those are sort of three big challenges that sales leaders have invested in. And so as a result of that, we're seeing, we are predicting that 80% of sales interactions in 5 years are going to be through digital channels, and that 60% of organizations are moving towards more of the Silicon Valley way of running their sales force, more process, more data, more measurement, more predictability as a result of this. So I think those are some of the big, more macro themes that we're seeing sales leaders try to use tech to address. I want to know for each of you, maybe like one or two big, whether it can be like an always on problem or a sort of initiative that you've got going on in the next 12, 18 months that CI has to play a huge role in for you.
Yeah, there's a couple. I think for me, one of the big ones, as I touched on the evolution of ZoomInfo, and my new colleague Thiago here in Chorus, right? We want to show growth across not just the business as a whole, but growth on the Chorus product line, our Engage solution. As we continue to branch out, conversation intelligence is really like, if not the most critical tool that I have to be able to understand, are we talking about these products enough? Sure, I can see it at the end of the funnel, right, with attach rates and revenue growth on those. But how do I go and affect that outcome? And the only way I can affect that outcome is using conversation intelligence. So that's a big one. I think one of the interesting things, maybe it was with the three of us that were having this conversation. Maybe it was just you and I, Thiago, I forget. But Thiago had like an interesting point around, and as you think back to the last year and a half, and just how much all of our worlds have changed, conversation intelligence is probably one of the only tools to help us understand, has our marketplace shifted? And I'm not talking about like competitor mentions or alternatives, but the buying committee has grown in certain areas. In some cases, it shrank. In some cases, it grew. There's new personas coming into these conversations, right? Like now, C-level individuals care a whole lot more about what they're spending on, and so like they're popping into conversations. And so, how are we doing when that takes place? You know, how do we think about, are we getting those members involved in our cycle, you know, early enough or at the right time, or should we not do it at all, right? If a CIO or a CTO comes in, do they kill the deal every time? So let's not talk about bringing in tech resources, right? Like we wouldn't just get those things without conversation intelligence. And that's why, you know, it's such a critical tool for me and as a user.
And just a quick follow-up, that's killer. It makes a ton of sense, right? Like it's the first time we've had a database of customer conversations that auto-populates and gets studied with AI. Do you, size of your team, size of your sales force, you know, are you personally going in and logging in and sort of doing the hunting, or do you have sort of a resource, an ops, an enablement, or a frontline leader that you sort of staff with or task with doing the mining to surface some of the insight for you out of conversations?
Yeah, it's both. Like my enablement team certainly is going and looking for stuff. I don't necessarily have the time to go farm all these things, but I'll say like, I'm interested in this. Can you find examples of that? Or, hey, we want to do a coaching session around this. Can you get a couple of examples?
Makes sense.
But then like I'm also when I start going back to the office, you know, I have like a 2.5 hour commute, and so I would always like just pull up snippets here or there, or pull up a full call and sort of go through and listen to things.
I love that. Instead of podcasts, instead of music, instead of silence.
I have to be in the right mood. Like there.
I understand. You know. I understand. Yeah, no, but it makes a ton of sense, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay. So Thiago, kind of over to you. Tell us a little bit about some of the big things that you're working on and the roles you guys got to play in it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Steven and I are in the same company, so I can echo a lot of his sentiment. I want to double down a little bit on just the fact that it is a multi-product approach that we have right now, and we're very aggressively integrating things, but it's a different way that we are pitching. So even how we think about setting up our teams, right? Like what is a rep's ability to go out and pitch the entire platform? What does that look like? And how is that being driven across the field, right? What is that over a potential overlay model, right? Or like including a solutions engineer, when do we do this or not? There are all sorts of elements when you're thinking about really how are we going to attack the market, and it's something that you iterate on over time. And without conversation intelligence, it'd be literally impossible to analyze that. All we would see, as Steven alluded to, was what are the attach rates on these, right? And that's it. And that's so late in the game, right? It's going to take us multiple months to get generalized data on that. The second, and I'll even go back to my previous time. I know you asked for what we're just working on now, but I think it's relevant here as well. And it's important to figure out like, what are the key initiatives that you want to drive. And I wouldn't pick more than 3 or 5 of those every quarter, and then make sure that you're setting up a cadence for that. So like, for example, for me, we'll use what I already talked about. It was pricing and packaging, right? And then negotiation. And then the third component was driving product roadmap. So what I had my team prepare every single month for us was a customer insights report. It talked about the top 5 features that we didn't have that people were bringing up, right? And then it had top 5 things that pissed customers off. And we did that every single month. We also did a similar report for here's how pricing and packaging, here's how it's seen, here's how the percentage of our team that's actually pitching things the right way. Here's the correlation to that to how much higher level packages we're selling compared to one-off transactional sales. And that was a monthly cadence. So it is important to set a framework, right? Also in terms of coaching, like for us is I required a coaching scorecard per week per rep. That was a requirement of mine. And we made sure that our team stuck with that. So those are just some ideas that I have and things that we continued on my time at Chorus as well.
That's super interesting. The top 5 things we don't have. It's any sales team can sort of like, any sales rep can even come out and say, if I only had that feature, I would have won that deal, right? If only we had. And I think what you're doing is you're just putting some more rigor behind that discussion, rather than sort of relying on, opportunity fields at a closed loss level and qualitative, this is what the sellers say. You're saying, no, here's what here's what the customers, prospects are saying. And here's if you want to go listen to the calls, they're right there.
Oh, we add them. So yeah, there was snippets of it. So one of my main goals, has been, hey, I want to drive product roadmap, right? And Steven are revenue leaders. We want to drive roadmap as much as we can.
Yeah.
And typically it would be me and him in a room, right? With people talking about what we think, and relying on notes in the CRM, which we all know are stale. Like, we can all admit that to one another. And now it's like, you don't even have to drive it anymore. You do a report like this every month. Your chief product officer, anyone on the product team, your engineering leaders, they listen to that. You don't have to say anything. You'll just take a look at what the next couple of sprints look like. And they will naturally just include that, because no one can take the pain of customers. They can't take it. You listen to it and you have multiple snippets of it, of the same problem. You can't help yourself. You're going to want to go in there and fix it.
It's genius. And so I think what I'm hearing from you is this, like, you're taking it to another level. You're not just saying, here's the data, here's the picture, right? Here's the chart. But here's an embedded piece of media that all you have to do is press play, and using that as an executive to bring some of the frontline insight to other people in the group, whether it's product marketing, et cetera, and saying, like, here's what's up. And removing friction for that message to get from the front line to your prospects. So I'm gonna
add one thing to that real quick, Nick, because you alluded to it a little bit, right? Because it is from the front lines. Another aspect is, company that I was at was quite acquisitive. So figuring out, like, what is being brought up in conversations with our buyers. What are they talking about? What companies do they consistently bring up? Right? Like, what is that? It's not just competitors, but it could be a competitor, but it could also lead to your acquisition strategy as well.
It's funny. We have a question coming in from the chat, and I think what we're going to do, we could talk about acquisitive and the role that could play, but the same themes keep showing up here for you as executives, right? Which is, I can react faster, and I'm using the voice of what's happening on the front line instead of qualitative and like clunky ways of getting that data out to who needs to hear it inside the business. And so we've got a great question that's coming in here about, how do you help companies realize? So let's say, how would you help a peer realize that the CI data are not just nice to have, must have tools, and that it's much more than just recording and reviewing calls? I can't tell if that was planted by one of your SDRs or not, but if it was, it was a great question. So you should have. I want to know each of your sort of personal opinions about that as practitioners. Why don't we start with Steve?
Yeah, I think there's like a reading the question as well. There's like a second portion of it as well. It looks like, but look, I think I was having a conversation with our CEO, and he sort of had this line recently that us as revenue leaders, as sellers, like we wake up with probably 2 goals in mind every single day. And that's one, hit my number, right? Like, how do I hit my number? And then number 2, how do I make my team better? I have to bring on new talent. I have to onboard new talent. And conversation intelligence is the one thing that enables you to do, not the one thing, but it's one of the few things that can help you sort of do both of those. And then I think, across the organization, and this is true with any tool that you buy, you have to have like a process and a level of executive commitment to be able to do these things, right? You can't just buy conversation intelligence tools and then, to your point, sort of use them to go listen to calls, because a lot of people won't just go listen to calls. Like listening to calls, I'll be honest, it's not my favorite thing to do. Right? Like I could be doing a lot of other things, but to be able, and Thiago talked about, like to pull snippets and to build a culture around reps that want to share and reps that want to get better. It's very similar, in my opinion. We have an SLA around speed to lead. Inbound lead comes in, we're following up with it in 90 seconds. That takes a cultural commitment to be able to do. And it's okay, like you have to go to the bathroom. It's okay, you don't want to listen to 5 calls a week. It's okay, like, but this is what we are going to do in this organization. It's going to help us. And then you sort of get that buy-in from the executive level on down. And now we have a culture of sharing, right? Like people will share calls because they know they're going to get highlighted in front of their peers. Sellers have egos. They want to be on the top of the leaderboard. Show them how it gets to the top of the leaderboard. Put them on the pedestal in front of the rest of the group. Like, listen to Dan do this talk track. He absolutely killed it. His win rate's been going up. This is how Dan is doing. And everybody's sort of going to naturally want to follow as well. But you have to put sort of a commitment to utilization and a process around it to drive, to get the value out of these types, or any tool, but conversation intelligence included.
Thiago, I imagine you've never had to answer this question.
Never. And I'm going to take it from a bit of a different perspective than Stephen, if that helps, just to because I'm sort of reading into this question a little bit, but to me, I'm thinking about like, how would I go about and get something like this approved within an organization, and how do I tie that to bigger organizational goals? So I don't think any of us currently work or would work at a company that doesn't talk about their customer centricity, right? Because typically, if you're at a company that isn't customer centric, they're probably going to die off. So, and your CEO in particular that you're working with will likely tell you they're extremely customer centric. They care deeply about the customer. So if you want to get closer to your customer and what they think and what they're going through in their day-to-day, there is no better way to do that than through the literal customer voice. So I always like to start at that meta level, because even if all your sales team is doing is just recording the conversations and bringing them up in a system that allows you to derive meaningful data points from it, even if that was it and you were doing nothing to improve your sales team at all, this is now going to give your company access to the most important voice that exists, which is your customer voice. So I would start that meta from that perspective. And good luck anyone saying, "No, that's not true," right? I don't think the customer voice is the most important thing. And then, as Stephen mentioned, there are the more tactical components. What I recommend is find the right partner, right, to make sure that you are developing in this. We have a strict system within our customer success space that helps people develop their maturity, right? But as Dan and Stephen were highlighting, it requires that executive commitment, right? In order to create that shift that you need, getting that right executive alignment that can drive that shift and that can commit to driving those outcomes from, hey, we're just looking for frontline productivity, better note taking, and better CRM data, to, hey, now we're using this in our executive meetings and it's driving meaningful strategic decisions for us. It requires the right alignment from the top down to get there, and find the right partner that's going to help guide you through that is what's going to be most important.
Love it. Great feedback from both of you. We've got about 10 minutes left, 9 minutes left. I've got sort of if we want to put on a little bit of our forward thinking goggles for a second, thinking about the recent acquisition, obviously the merger of Chorus into ZoomInfo. And it's really interesting because you have a data centric company, right? That's taking on a conversation intelligence and really seeing the value of not just the sort of use cases, but also what happens when you connect conversation data to other data points, other parts of the tech stack. What happens when you connect it to the engagement part of the tech stack, the enablement part of the tech stack, the sort of opportunity deal management, revenue intelligence part of the tech stack, and of course also the CRM. And so, our position at Gartner is that conversation data, the conversation as a data source is what makes, in the long term, the technology so exciting. We can turn customer conversations into a really rich source of data. And so if you think about it that way, and we think about what happens when we combine different data points with different functions, whether it's marketing, sales development, other kinds of roles, sales strategy and analytics, what are some of the really exciting, more future-looking use cases of conversation data across the sales tech stack? So I'm curious, sort of, as you think about the future, and I'll give you a really simple one that I'm a big fan of, because I come from the root of SDRs and sales development and just more accurate call disposition and sort of next best actions. Like, this person said this, then I'm going to automatically enroll them in the next, in this nurture approach versus this approach. I think that's a really powerful use case for the sales development role. But I'm curious, as you think about, the vision of conversation data, what are you personally excited about for your role? So why don't we start with Steve, and then we'll go to Thiago.
Yeah, there's a lot that gets me excited. I'll try to just sort of pick two. Yeah, I think I can do two. I think one of which you started to touch on. This is going to be challenging to get it down to two. I think one of the things is being able to take the conversations that your team has had, and we run a play sort of called Go Back, right? Like, go back to old opportunities, things that maybe stalled out, things that sort of closed, what we call deads, 3, 6, 9 months ago, which is frankly the majority of a sales pipeline, right? All the stuff that ends sort of in no decision, whether it was on the prospect side, whether it was on the customer side, to be able to run more thoughtful engagements with those organizations, because now you know what the conversation was, what they talked about, who you were speaking with, like the sentiment of those individuals. So imagine a world where you can go take a look at all of the calls that you've had, over the last 6 months that had positive sentiments. They're still open. And then there's a new leader that's come on board, right? There's sort of this trigger moment. For us, it would be a new head of sales, a new VP of marketing, a new CEO. So you can go back, and maybe it's even the other way around, right? Like, all the companies you had negative interactions with, it didn't go as planned. And so you feel like, oh, we lost our chance here, but now there's a new leader. Like, to be able to systematically pull those in, to your point then, Dan, take those opportunities in a thoughtful way, architect a campaign through your engagement solutions, through your SDR team, through your account executives. That's one way. We do a little bit of this already today, but it's starting to get stronger as Chorus and ZoomInfo get integrated together. And I talked about the buying committee changing, over the last 18 months and more people being involved. We have a notion of being multi-threaded in opportunities. And if we can do that, perhaps earlier, we can still win quickly. We can win for larger ASP. We can solve more challenges. They buy more products, whatever it might be. So to be able to instantly see, here's our opportunities. We have Dan on the call. Dan mentioned he's got to talk to Thiago already. To be able to have that insight on who is Thiago, have his name, his phone number, his email, like, while we're on the call, and say, hey, oh, it's great. Yeah, Thiago came from, blah, blah, blah. We worked with him in the past. What time are you guys all available? Right? Like, that level of ability is one of the things that gets me really excited. And so I said two. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to give Thiago the rest.
You took like two of my favorite ones, Steven. Like, I don't even know.
Sorry, I can keep going if you don't have any more.
I mean, like,
you can plus one, right? You can plus one. All right.
I'll plus one, but then I'll take like a level like higher, and I'll even tell it from a personal story perspective too. So when I purchased ZoomInfo, I got to have a conversation during the process with our president and COO, Chris Hayes. And I really got to know their platform throughout the process, the broad platform. And I got off that call and I reached out to our CEO of Chorus, Jim Benton. I said, hey, Jim, this company needs us. And I wasn't thinking it from literally what happened now at that time, right? But it was what kind of like, let's try to engage with them from a partnership perspective, because our product suite and the data that we have combined with their assets will transform how people like me, we go to market. It will be able to create automations that we never dreamed possible in the past, and allow our people to focus on what's hard to automate, right? Which is what we're doing right now, right? This human-to-human interaction, true human-to-human personalization, as I like to call it. So for me, what I'm most excited about are the workflows that we're going to be able to build as an organization to automate and feed information in a way that is very feasible for a rep to take and take action on, right? So they can receive it, understand it, and take action. It's like, imagine I'm in a deal and I'm working, I am multi-threaded, but I get an alert, simple alert that lets me know like, hey, you might be forgetting about this person. By the way, this person has purchased Engage in the past, or Chorus in the past, or whatever product anybody sells. So that ability to take that information in a very simple way, make it actionable for people. Because I think what we're all seeing is there's so many tools out there. Oh my God, right? That consolidation is just natural. It's a natural path because it's information overload. So we're gonna partner with companies that make it easy for us to take action on that and drive the outcomes that we all look as revenue leaders, which is we want to increase customer satisfaction and we want to increase overall revenue because it's usually those are intimately combined.
Well, the majors, that's awesome. I wish we could spend the whole hour on just that. Maybe the demand gen team will take that into consideration. But honestly, the takeaway for me from both of you, and we'll sort of close on this, is that while it may sound overwhelming, the way we're talking about all of the data that is available and all the different types of workflows, there are two key things. The first one is we're gonna surface opportunities for sellers to make good decisions based on, like that example of, he mentioned Thiago. Today, I'd have to write down Thiago, look them up probably on maybe LinkedIn Sales Navigator, you know what I mean? Try to figure out if we've talked to them at all in the past, there's this whole research process, this whole workflow that's not very seller friendly, but we just do it because we're, that's what good looks like, and remove some of the friction of being able to do something like that, right? So number one is not just the workflow, but making it actually easy for a seller. Caring about the seller's experience in the tech is I think a huge theme. So